So please, introduce yourself.
Thank you.
It should be on automatically.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Seun Toye Kayode. I'm a vice president at Goldman Sachs, and my current role is as head of our Launch with GS initiative, which is basically $1 billion that we've committed to making a more equitable venture capital ecosystem.
Fantastic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jo Dawn Whitlock. I'm the Vice President for UPS Capital, which is a division and business unit within UPS. Very excited to be with you today and to talk about the issues and especially equality. Thank you.
That's loud, sorry. And hi, I'm Sarah Woodhouse. I am the Deputy Company Secretary and the Head of Corporate for Unilever. Been in the Netherlands 4 years, before that in Asia, and then before that in London. So inspiring session before this one, and we've got a hard act to follow. So looking forward to it.
I've listened to your journeys, and I'm sure we're going to be fine. Thank you very much. I think that one of the questions that I got about this subject, and I will give it to Jo Dawn, is what is actually the difference between equity and equality? And I get that question a lot. And Jo Dawn, I want you to explain to the audience a little bit, what is it and what have you done to make impact on both of those topics?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very important for us to define and unpack the difference between equality and equity. Equality is when we give everyone the same, right? So that's equality. And equity is when we give people what they need, the tools they need to be successful. So we'll unpack that a little bit more. Let me give an example, and then I'll take it to the workplace after this example, is if I were to hand out shoes to everyone to be equal, I would give you all the same shoe. But if I was going to touch on equality, I think this is the seat that doesn't work too well. Let's try this, Mike. Is this one better? Okay, perfect. If I was going to touch on the equity, I would recognize as a leader on my team the individuals who needed a different shoe. So if I had a runner needs a track shoe. It needs a racing flat to be successful. If I have a ballerina on my team, she would need her toe shoe to be successful. So it's knowing the difference and giving the individuals the tools that they need to be successful. If I take that into the workplace and I apply that where I have had that impact within the business, I take you back 8 years ago when I was a brand new mommy, and my baby was just a couple months old, and I needed to travel to one of our offices in Atlanta. And I called my other mommy friends and I said, okay, I'm new to this. I am nursing my son. How do I pump at work? And they said, okay, well, here's the tricks. So you have to make sure that your pump has a cigarette adjuster so you can do it in your car. And then you have to get early and you go to the back of the parking lot so you can get as much privacy as possible. And then bring a lunch bag because you want to put your milk into the lunch bag so you can put it into the community fridge so nobody's offended by it. I am very proud to say that in that building, before I arrived, when my baby was little, and today, there is a lactation room that is equipped with private rooms for mothers with a fridge and a sink and soap so that they can clean their equipment, be private, and be able to store their milk for their babies in privacy. And to me, that is equity. Men do not need a lactation room at work. We do. And when I went to HR and I made this request, it was yes, no hesitation. Nobody had ever asked for a lactation room. They had never asked for the mommy's room. They just assumed they needed to follow the before, which was to pump in your car, find the privacy, ask how to do it. So I think the undertone of what we're hearing today, and I'll reinforce, is use your voice. We are underrepresented, and we know what we need. So we need to ask for what we need, because sometimes the little asks make a big impact. When we talk about equality at UPS, some of the programs, we have many programs that provide equality, but one that I am specifically involved in and passionate about is joining our business resource groups. Our business resource groups are communities that come together essentially and unite on topics that are important to them. And one that I'm passionately involved in is women's leadership development within the organization. And we call it WLD. So if I use the acronym, because we love our acronyms, it'll be WLD. And I've been a part of that program since 2005, when it was a pilot in the United States. And it started off as for women, by women. And it was a part of UPS 22 years ago, so almost to celebrate my 23rd year this year. And in that program, it became very prominent that it was going to be for women, by women. And unfortunately, what happened at that time is that it became a girls' club. Men started to call it, the girls' club or the ladies' lunch, and we started to get that back in 2005. But through progression, through change, and through persistence, I started to see a change in the organization about 2012 to 2015, where men started to lean into WLD. They didn't call it the girls' club anymore. They wanted to be a part of the women leadership development. They wanted to see what the topics were that were important to women, their colleagues, their coworkers, their friends, and be able to actively participate in those discussions. Now, if you look at 2020, 2022, I started to see another shift in the business, where we don't just have now the interest, we have the allies, we have the sponsors. In the Europe region, Raoul Stewartson, along with Christina, are our sponsors for WLD. We have that balanced approach coming in, and it's such a great place to be in when we come together on topics that are important to us, that we have the support of the male voice in those meetings to support us in the topics that we're discussing. So if I fast forward that to today, and there's a lot of WLD members. If you're a WLD member, yes, yay, they're there. If you're part of that, and if you look at UPS in the Europe region today, we have 17 active chapters across the region. And the topics that they come together and talk about are leadership, like we've talked today. They have events that bring in speakers from outside to inside, so we can learn from voices from within the company. What does it look like? Voices from outside of the company. We have events that teach us about different topics. One we have coming up is inclusive language. How do we do that in the workplace? Let's take it a step further, and let's check ourselves and how we speak to one another and how we accept people to speak to us as women in meetings, and how do we educate all on inclusive language in the workforce. And we give back to our community. We have lots of community involvement that we do from the WLD perspective. And I think if you look at best practices and the evolution of best practices, that is one that I hold on to. Because UPS knows that we need to build women leaders within the organization, and I have seen that transformation. But it's also UPS recognizes that we need to support women outside of the organization as well. It's one achievement to do it within. It's another achievement to take it outside and externally look at our leadership makeup. UPS is incredibly proud to sponsor and align with GNOs that give back to the community and support our women's export program. And if we look at what that looks like today, it's 17,000 impacted women and women-owned businesses around the globe in 90 different countries for us, giving them the tools to be successful. So you talk about the internal knowledge, the external achievements. You ask yourself, does it work, right? You do all of this, you have these BRGs, WLD, you focus on it, you give back to your community. Does it work? Does it make an impact? Well, I want to share these statistics with you because I'll let you make up your mind if you think that it works. Our board of directors is 46% represented by women, 31% non-white. If you look at our executive leadership team, 40% women, 30% non-white. If you look at our entry level, 37% represented by women. If you look at our senior and middle management team, 26% represented by women. And I've heard today that you have a quota, You have a target. At UPS, we have a goal. And that goal is in 2022 to have representation across the globe at 26%. And I think that that's important when you look at these goals. Do they achieve what they need to achieve? McKinsey did a report in 2020, and they stated that organizations that have women in leadership roles that are over 30% are significantly more likely to be successful than companies that are between 10 and 30%. So what does that mean? It means everything that's been talked about today is that our voice matters. It's not one thing to have a seat at the table. It's also another thing to have that voice at that table. Be that influence. When you see a need, meet the need. If they need a lactation room, bring in the lactation room, because leadership matters, inclusivity matters, and equity matters.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I hope you understand that we try to look at companies a little bit more so you get an understanding that you need to use your voice, otherwise change will never happen. And it all starts with one person, and it gets a ripple effect pretty quickly. But what we're talking here is about use your voice. And I know how hard it is. You've seen how hard it is in the stories that you hear. But just do it. There's nothing to lose. So thank you for sharing. I practice on your name. Sheon. I did it once, and I did it good. Thank you. So corporations play a huge role into addressing gender and racial equality. So what is your company doing, Goldman Sachs, to invest in those people and businesses that are diverse owned? And specifically, how is your firm integrating those processes and create long-term change in the industry?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'll start off by saying that by no means is Goldman Sachs marketed as, focusing on these issues. And I think we should talk about what we do a lot more publicly, because we've been working in this space really since I joined. And that was actually one of the reasons why, coming out of university, I decided to work at Goldman Sachs. So essentially, a lot of people know that Goldman Sachs is an investment bank. That is what I will call probably our public business. So we help companies go public. We do mergers and acquisitions. We also have the private side of our business where we invest our own balance sheet for returns. We invest on behalf of our clients, etc. And I think the way that we've been able to have a successful D&I agenda is by making sure that everything that we do is actually embedded with our bottom line, which is making money and driving returns. And so in terms of what we did from a public perspective with our banking franchises, in 2020, we announced that we would actually not take a company public except they had one woman on their board at least. In 2021, we increased that to 2 people, insisting that one of them will be a person of color. And what was interesting about that was that, we're obviously a leader in investment banking, and so a lot of our competitors looked to us, but no one else really followed. People did not follow. So the point about using your voice, it's one thing to use your voice individually, but as a corporate organization, to take the risk of making these public targets, which could actually risk your bottom line, but knowing that it is the right thing to do and it is actually going to drive a better and more successful agenda, is the way that we approach it. If we look at the private side of the business, which is really where we work, we have programs like Launch with GS. So in 2018, back to the point about women using their voice again, we had Stephanie Cohen join as our Chief Strategy Officer. And she really was focused on looking at what the venture capital ecosystem looked like. I shared this earlier in a small roundtable that we were in about the risk of businesses that are focusing on issues that affect women and people of color not being funded, because the people who are starting those businesses are most likely to be identifying with those groups as well. Huge risk, missed opportunity. But it's not just about doing what is good. Like I said, we are a profit-driven organization. So we decided to look at the data. What does the data say about, diverse businesses? What are the returns, et cetera? Well, from a public perspective, diverse companies are likely to have 3.3x higher multiple performance when they IPO. So there is an agenda that means that we're going to be very successful and make money for our clients. And so we said, okay, we're not actually going to start off raising client capital. Let's use our balance sheets. So we pledged in 2018 to invest $500 million in female-led companies and also female venture capital, private equity, and growth equity firms. Because the data also shows that if you have a woman investor, they're more likely to invest. Problem is, only 12% of investors are female. which means that obviously a lot of female-led businesses are not funded. And so we really drove this agenda. You know, we created a team. A lot of us actually work on this initiative full-time. It's not like a side project that we get, you know, diversity marks on. It's actually our full-time job that we get paid our bonuses and our base salaries on. So it's also this thing of not just shifting the diversity agenda to the side and asking people, likely it will be women, to spend a lot of their time not just doing their day job, but also focusing on this agenda on behalf of their companies, but actually creating competitive, career-driven opportunities for people who are looking for work in impact, etc., to actually thrive, but also use the same skills that they would use in any other job at the company. So we decided to start this Launch with GS initiative in 2018 in the US. And we actually found that it's been extremely successful. We focus on our balance sheet to invest in companies directly, but then we also decided, you know what, we have so many clients that are great aggregators of capital. Let's actually build a fund that specifically focuses on female-led venture capital firms. And so we launched our Launch Opportunities Fund, and we were able to raise over 100 million, and that has been fully deployed now. And we actually now have this interesting dynamic where a lot of those women GPs that we backed early on have unicorns that are now part of our portfolio, driving returns to our clients. And so that's kind of on the private side. And then just generally in terms of our culture, I'll talk about philanthropy and then I'll end on just internal policies. So from a philanthropic perspective, in 2008, in response to the financial crisis, we launched our 10,000 Women program. And the whole point of that was that we understood that if women were more empowered to start businesses, have successful businesses, especially in the third world, that actually contributes way more to economic growth than any other initiative that any government could undertake. And this is where it becomes very important as corporate organizations to really kind of take your place and not leave it to the governments and the countries. And so we launched 10,000 Women, and essentially the goal was in 10 years, by 2018, we would have 10,000 women that we supported in building businesses. In the UK specifically, we partnered with Said Business School to come up with a business training course just to give women the information and the support that they needed. And then I'm really proud to say that, you know, by now, up until 2022, 100,000 women have been impacted by that program in more than 200 countries. And we've been able to lend over almost $2 billion. And I'm so proud that this initiative exists in my own home country, Nigeria, you know, where people who have like businesses, small food businesses, one of the women was actually able to end up serving her moi moi, which is kind of like is it like a cake or like a bean cake? Exactly. She was able to actually serve that at the White House to the Obamas. You know, so these little, these small initiatives, and it's a program that people know we do, but we're not known for that. And I don't think the point of like, you know, what you may call corporate social responsibility is really about bigging up the company. It's just about impact. You need to just focus on impact. So that's what we've done from a public perspective, private perspective, in terms of sticking to our returns focused agenda, and then on the philanthropy side. And then within the firm, generally, you know, we've really focused on creating community. So we have incredible affinity networks. I've been leading our recruitment efforts as a side job to all my other roles and responsibilities since I joined. And that's really important. And I think it really gives me a very, very fulfilled life, knowing that I can see people who've come into the firm, gotten promoted, and gone through the ranks. And then we've also decided to publicly sign up to a lot of the quotas. So the Gender Pay Gap Initiative in the UK, we've signed up to it. So every year, we have to say, this is the difference between pay for men and women. And we're definitely not there, but you can imagine like the headlines, it's an incentive. It's an incentive. To the point earlier around quotas, etc., they are extremely important because it's not about the company. It's about the fact that if you say that you're an incredible place to work and these are your stats, are you going to be proud next year to be at the same place? And so we're ready to take on the challenge of being public about, you know, how people are paid within our organization and hopefully growing from there.
Perfect. That's quite an impact, so thank you for sharing that story. Another impactful story is from Unilever, of course. They had gender balance in manager's position in 2019. So Sarah, can you talk a little bit through how you got there and what has helped to make a difference?
Yeah, of course. Hopefully this one works. So yeah, our journey started a long time ago, and it started with a very bold public commitment. And I think that's really where, essentially the journey has to start in terms of holding an organisation really to account. So this was back in 2010. We knew that we had, serious deficiencies in terms of senior female leaders, but we knew that we needed to make a change. We recognized the fact that diversity of thought was just so important in terms of our organization and in terms of growth. So how did we do that? It really starts with incredible tone from the top. So we've obviously had a number of CEOs over this period, but one continuum that has continued has essentially been a gender diversity board that was set up in 2010. That is chaired on a quarterly basis by our CEO and has representation from many markets of Unilever around the world. Plus, key ambassadors, from a gender perspective, who sit on that board, who guide. And also what we've recognized is that really, in terms of what measures do we need to take, is different on a different geography basis. So the needs are different, and I love the story in terms of a lactation room. We have other initiatives that we've had in the Middle East, for example, in terms of menstruation policy, in terms of giving women time off work when they're not comfortable to come into the office. So it looks at what is really necessary from a geography perspective, but also really connecting the dots, in the organisation. So similarly, we have a very wide organisation of champions and ambassadors, and obviously, I am one of those very much. But sharing stories. Helping in terms of our mentor program as well within the organization, giving young leaders the confidence to take the risk. And that's also part of my own journey in terms of how I've got to the position I am in today. It's about taking risk, being assertive and being confident. So as I say, tone from the top, really important, and that's a message that's echoed on a bi-weekly basis with our town halls from our CEO. He really takes that seriously. And also from a leadership perspective, having that open door policy. So when we look at initiatives that maybe aren't working, we need to understand, well, why aren't they working in this particular market? So picking up on some of the themes, in terms of the panel before, the importance of being human, the importance of listening, and the importance of recognizing, well, okay, this isn't working, this isn't right, but not giving up. So that's a very important point for me. I never give up in terms of actually reaching this target and this goal. So those are obviously key. We've also talked, another area that I've got involved in has been around talent recruitment. So listening also from an HR perspective, and really looking at technology as well, to make sure that there is no bias in these recruitment policies. So as a lawyer looking at this, and a proud female, I want to make this unbiased and I want to make this work, I want to make this happen. So really driving initiatives together makes them happen so much faster, doing that with like-minded individuals. We've also taken a step at a senior level, so in terms of our top recruitments, any top position essentially has to be open and has to be truly open, also looking at an external benchmarking perspective to really ensure that whoever you're placing in that position, really is against the marketplace, and really looking at that gender diversity as well. So that really helps as well when you're needing to give the message internally as well as to why has X got this role, why have we needed to recruit externally for this role. We're recruiting the best person and we're going that extra mile, in terms of making sure that we also meet our goals and objectives from a gender perspective. Also for me, it very much is part of all of our individual business strategies. So my previous role, I was the General Counsel for Food and Refreshment based here in the Netherlands. What I brought to that business strategy was exactly this, in terms of how do we achieve, gender equality and equity across our division and our business. Even though I'm a lawyer, I have an active role in driving that, bringing it to the meeting as to the fact that, okay, how are we accomplishing this goal? Where are our gaps? Where are our hotspots? Where do we need to double down? And how have we done that? We've also done a lot of training, in terms of really understanding what is our own bias. So that has also been really important, for each of us, to understand where are our own biases and how do we make sure that we create an environment of psychological safety so that individuals, understand the open door and aren't afraid, to come and actually contribute and meet. So that sort of gives us an idea of a few. There are many more, but hopefully that gives an idea and a theme.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Sarah talks a little bit about the younger generation. So, Jo Dawn, if we talk about the next generation of women in the workplace, how do we support them?
Yes, how do we support them?
And it looks a simple question, but it's not.
It does, right? It does. I'd like to just share a story about Jennifer Heyman. If any of you know who Jennifer Heyman is, she is a Harvard grad. She's a CEO of a company in the U.S. called Rent the Runway. Anybody familiar with her company? Yes, it made headlines, and so we'll talk about that as why it made headlines. But essentially, for those who don't know her company, it's a clothing company, so you can rent gowns instead of buying them. So it's sustainable and logical. If you need to go to a party or a wedding, why buy the gown when you can rent it, is pretty much her slogan. And in October of 2021, she made headlines, smashed the headlines. Not only her, it was also her daughter. Because on October 21st, she was the first company with a female CFO, CEO, and COO to go public on NASDAQ. It was an amazing day. It was celebrated around the globe for all women to see this representation at the NASDAQ and just to watch her and her entourage ring the bell, but also to see her two daughters there with her celebrate in that moment. Not only in that moment did she have a great IPO, she closed at 10% higher than her IPO. So it was a phenomenal day all around. Somebody interviewed her and asked her little daughter, 4 years old, what is it that Rent the Runway does? And her little daughter looked up and said, it's girls who run the world. And yet again, absolutely celebrated, and I did in that moment. It was so very cool to see the generation starting to shift. But also, if you look at it from a different perspective, it's also very terrifying. It's terrifying that that is a headline. It's terrifying that that is not normal, that we have female committees coming up to the NASDAQ. It's terrifying to think that it's adorable for a 4-year-old to think that women run the world. And so when we talk about the change, we need to expect more. We need to expect more representation. And there's been so much female empowerment today. It's just been magnetic, energetic, in all of those terms, it really has. We need to expect more from our female founders. Did you know that only 14 of the 134 unicorns are from female founders? It's not enough. It's 2022. 8% of women are at the CEO. It's not enough. We need to expect more. But we also need to acknowledge the landscape that we're in. We also need to acknowledge it is an uphill battle for females in leadership. And this came up in the panel this morning, is talking about how difficult it is. Well, let me take you to an article that was published last month by Forbes magazine, which really lays out the landscape, in my opinion. And the name of the article, I don't want to get it wrong in case you want it, which is Gender Disparities in CEO Takedowns. And in this article, the journalist analyzed 5 years of 5 males and 5 females in CEO takedown pieces. And what they found in this article analysis was that females were proactively removed from their positions for standards that their male counterparts were not held accountable to. The males were reactively removed from their positions for massive missteps that had already happened. So if we look at the landscape, we have to acknowledge what we're in. We have to acknowledge what the young up-and-comers see and the young girls from the four-year-old I see. But we also need to acknowledge the power that we have in this room, each and every one of us. There are many initiatives we heard across the board, from the political initiatives to the corporate initiatives, but I want to transition into how do we in this room change the perspective for the generation coming up. And there's so much that we can do. Not our companies, not our governments, us as individuals, being authentic to who we are and truly with authentic nature want the next generation to have an easier go at leadership than what we had. So how do we do that? I'll share with you another story that I had, which is believing in the dream, asking about the dream, and supporting the dream. I had an 8-year-old little girl come up to me one day after I was at an event, and she said, "I want to be just like you when I grow up." I said, "I know, right?" Oh, it's like so touching. And so connecting with the 8-year-old, I said, "Tell me about your dream. What is it that you want to do?" She said, "I want to be Insta famous." I'm not even on Instagram. I want to be a YouTuber. I said, "That's fantastic. So you want to be in media and communications." Fantastic. And it had just so happened that in a couple weeks I was being interviewed by a radio station. And so I asked her and her mommy, I said, "Would you like to come as my guest and see behind the scenes to make your dream come true? Do you want to see what that looks like? To encourage the dream along." They showed up that day. And not only did this little girl get to see behind the scenes, but the host allowed her to be on the radio so she could give a shout out to her grandparents and all of her friends that were listening in that day. And it was a great moment to watch that connection happen between the dream and what I was able to bring to her through the opportunities afforded to me. I also mentored a high school student who was graduating, and she was very interested in international political affairs, very uncertain what the next step looks like, going from your high school education to your more formalized university education. But she was already looking at, what does it look like when I come out of university? And I leveraged my network to help her carry along the dream. And I asked my friend Christina Falcone, I said, "Christina, I have a mentee that would like to learn more about the world that you lead and are very successful in. Would you take the time?" And Christina, of course, said, "Yes, I'll take the time, no problem." Christina not only took the time, she took the time in the evening away from her family, an hour with my mentee to encourage her along the way, encourage her dreams along the way, and to encourage the path of this young lady aspiring to be just like us. And I think as I inspire all of you today is know that it's not a policy. It needs to be authentic leadership that builds the next generation. It makes it easier for them. So be true to yourself. Recognize those opportunities. I want to end with a quote because this also came up earlier. And I put this quote in my International Women's Day boxes that I sent to all the females on my team in March. And the quote goes, it said, "You know who the strong women are, because they are the ones building each other up, not tearing each other down." So when we talk about how we engage with each other, be a strong woman and support, not in just how you say, but also what you do. Your whole self supports, because that shows and reflects that you are a strong woman. There's another quote that I'll give you today and leave with you, which I love because it's so meaningful, impactful when you're in certain situations where it becomes tough. And the quote is, "Insecurities are loud, confidence is quiet." You don't always need to be the loud one in the room either. Be confident in who you are. If somebody comes to you and says, "You got the position from a quota," confidence is quiet. And I will leave it with that.
Thanks so much. And I have my timekeeper there that the time is going really, really fast, so we need to be a little bit short, Seyun. we know that the data shows that in diverse teams is good for business, but we don't really see the investment in that area. So how you think that we need to address that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and honestly, it's something that keeps me and my team up at night, because we are being tasked to ensure that through Goldman's influence, either directly through our balance sheets or through client capital, we are actually pouring capital into the ecosystem in a way that it can be more diverse. I'll tell a little story. So one of the things that we do at GS is, obviously, we invest at a later stage than most businesses will exist, because this is an investment opportunity and not philanthropy. So I just want to make that distinction. And by the way, with philanthropic initiatives, you really need to be mindful and ensure that they can be sustainable, because as we go into a market downturn, those are sometimes some of the first things to go away. And what you have behind you is people that you've supported for maybe 1 year or 2 years that have grown to rely on this, and you can't renew the commitment. So I would actually prefer having skin in the game, being an investor, having equity and ownership, so that you can actually be in the journey for the long term. But that's an aside. So we run something called an entrepreneur cohort, and essentially what it is we recognize that for people of color, for example, which I'm sure is not a surprise that I'm super passionate about, they actually suffer more than women or any other diversity group when it comes to venture capital. In the UK, for example, 60% of Black-led businesses are bootstrapped. Not because we have a lot of capital, but because going into the venture capital ecosystem is not even part of culture. Understanding debts and loans, again, not part of culture. And so the aspiration of IPOing or whatever doesn't even come into people's minds most of the time. They're just building these businesses to keep their bills paid. So 60% of businesses are bootstrapped, and 0.6% of total venture capital funding is poured into the Black ecosystem. When we were doing research around launching the Launch program, really bad pun, in the UK, I actually was like, I need to look at the data, and I found that only 38 people of color have ever raised any kind of venture funding at any level in the UK, with only one woman raising a Series A, which, by the way, isn't even the level that GS invests. And so when you look at all these stats, what do you then do? We decided that we will run an entrepreneur cohort, which essentially puts our money where our mouth is. So we bring these founders into our organization, and we pair every single company with 2 Goldman Sachs partners. So our partners are the most senior individuals in our organization, and we try to pair them based upon what the partner does for work. So if you have a consumer business, we'll pair you with the head of consumer for investment banking. But also maybe where they invest personally. So a lot of people, angel invest, etc. And what we're really trying to do with that is, one of the key gaps to actually raising capital is friends and family. I could be a guy from San Francisco, writes an idea on a piece of paper. I mean, you guys know the story too well, and raise like 2 million in one day. But a person of color isn't even going to be at that university, probably, and they're not going to be at the party where they'll meet these people who are happy to take that risk. And so we're like, okay, we need to provide a situation where a lot of the time, and we've spoken about this a lot today, when you connect with a human individual, you have an opportunity to hear their story, you're more likely to build trust. But if you're just looking at credentials on a piece of paper or a pitch deck, it doesn't really resonate. And so with the cohorts, we're actually giving these founders access to our networks. We are a private wealth organization. We have so many private wealth clients who are interested in this asset class. How do we put these founders in front of them to give them an opportunity to raise capital? And so the story I'll share is about a founder called Aisha. She's the founder of an incredible company called Propel, which is all about getting women to invest, starting with as little as £250, including property, because as women, we like tangible assets. And, she was a private wealth advisor at Goldman. She worked there for 7 years, went to London Business School, so had all the right credentials. And, she was covering clients, and she was like, even my female clients aren't investing as much as my male clients. So I'm going to quit my job and start this business. Easy, right? You'd invest in Aisha. I would. She wasn't able to raise the capital. She was literally trying to raise $500,000 and wasn't able to do it. And so she was one of the founders that we included in our recent entrepreneur cohort. And actually last week we had her pitching her business to our entire women's network, which was over 500 women in Europe. And at that call, she was explaining how, off the back of being part of the cohort, taking advantage of all of the opportunities that were provided within the 6-week period that we ran it, she had an oversubscribed round. She's hired 2 people. She's been able to, and she did all of this while she was pregnant. So without corporates and people of privilege, a lot of people that I'm looking at in this room with many, many years of corporate experience, a lot of savings, if we don't actually realize that we need to create ecosystems and spaces where you can hear stories of people, we're not going to move the needle. And that's why the cohorts is one of the things that I'm really, really excited to put my time and energy into. You know, creating spaces where all you have to do is create a space. You don't need to force the agenda, but no one's going to hear a good idea and say, nah, I'll pass because it's a woman, or I'll pass because it's a person of color. We all want to actually make money and drive returns, and exciting ideas are the key to that. And so I think creating those spaces is a huge part of what we do at Goldman. Raven over here in our team actually oversees all of those efforts, and it's her full-time job, to my point earlier. Creating those spaces, making those connections, absolutely critical to moving the needle.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And I'm running a little bit over time, but Sarah, I want to give you the opportunity. You told a great journey about Unilever and the gender diversity that you have, but how do you continue to drive this gender equity within Unilever?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and it picks up on some of the themes that we've been discussing. So I'll keep it brief, but essentially we've worked on the internal organisation. But listening to the stories, there's a wider impact that we need to bring in terms of the overall footprint, and particularly in terms of advertising. So to remove any of the stereotypes that perhaps many of us were brought up with in terms of advertising, that needs to go. We mustn't have, our children, watching and have the biases that perhaps, many of us, have been through over the course of our lives. So this is something that we've been working on over the last few years, with Unilever. It's something that we're very passionate about, and really, going through each of our brands and making sure that each one of those brands has its charter. And that's from a gender diversity perspective across the board. And what's really powerful is that then also, when I get my legal hat on, it's been really empowering for my team to also be looking geographically around the world as to, okay, well, what laws do we want to change? Where do we want to try and build this equity and this equality? So for a legal team as well, it's had a massive impact, really powerful, really engaging the whole of the organization. So it is a movement. We've all got to do it. We've all got a responsibility, from a corporate perspective across the piece, to drive this change. So thank you.
Super, thank you so much. First of all, of course, I want to thank you for sharing those fantastic stories, and particularly from the view from a corporate perspective, because I think that is important. And use this to see that companies really are trying, and we all know it's way too little companies that actually are doing it. But I also want to give you some hope that you see that a lot of those companies are doing fantastic work. And conferences like this is to connect with other companies. Share what they are doing, listen what they are doing, be curious what they're doing, and then try to be the voice in your company to try and change that as well. Because we still have a lot of work to do. As Abera talked about, as everybody here is talking about, there's still so much work that we still need to do. But I hope that this inspires you to also talk within your companies to do all those great things. So thank you again, and thank you.